Hi, good evening. I'm Nigel. I'm from Boulder Nissan, and yes, I am ecumenical EV evangelist. The first thing I wanted to show you is this. This is 1 gallon of gasoline. It's empty, but this is 1 gallon of gasoline. It weighs 6¾ pounds. When you burn it in an internal combustion engine, it produces 19 pounds of CO2. This is 1 pound of CO2, which is a 30.5-inch diameter ball. And for anyone that's wondering, 57 degrees at sea level. Someone's bound to ask. This is another way of showing it, which is a 2-foot 1-inch cube. So what I do is I go out and this is what I show to people, because it's very difficult for people to understand what does that look like. You can't see it. A pound of butter is about that big, but a pound of CO2 is that big. And each car is producing, for every gallon of gasoline, 19 of those. So I like to do that just to sort of shock people a little bit. And obviously we have our brown cloud, which I noticed a lot today, and that is a lot of particulate matter and an awful lot of this. And it's so funny because you see it on the other side of the city and you go, they got it over there. And they're standing on the other side of the city looking at us going, oh yeah, they've got it over there. But we're all walking around in it. We have to do something about it. We have to start educating people about it. Now you are, and it's funny because we're in a church, you are sort of the choir, because you're here for a reason, because you are aware of these things. But for now, we have to spread the word through you to other people. We have to go out and sing so beautifully that other people want to come and join our choir and spread, because that's the only way you're going to do it. You can't rely on, sadly, on dealerships or manufacturers to go out there and push this product. There's a fear within the industry, because it's going through a very big change. If you think about it, when you have a dealership, they don't make money at the front end. You don't make money on selling new cars. It just doesn't happen, or very rarely. So it's made in parts and servicing is where a dealership will survive. The problem with electric cars is that they only need a tire rotation in 6 months' time, and in a year's time, a tire rotation, a battery inspection, maybe replace your brake fluid and your in-cabin air filter. So there is no revenue stream there. So we're possibly one of the last generations of dealerships as they are right now, which is an interesting thought. But that seems to be the way that it's going. There is a big competition between all of the manufacturers that are bringing out cars right now, I found, to say things like, I've got more horsepower than you, I've got more torque than you, I can do 0 to 60 quicker than you. It's not a competition to see how fast your car is or how much torque and how quickly it can go from 0 to 60. It's about its range. And there's a lot of people that don't need, we've lived with range anxiety since electric cars came out. Most people don't need the extra miles. Tesla has different size batteries, 65, 75, 85, 90, 100, for more range. But the average American does, 90% of us do less than 70 miles a day, and 70% of us do less than 29 miles a day. And in my 9 years of selling cars, people would always come in and say, well, if only that did 100 miles, I'd buy that. Or if that did 150 miles, I would buy that. And whenever you get to that, okay, well, it now does 200 miles, people go, well, if only if it did 250 miles. We don't always need it. It's like with phones. People have their cell phones, and it's got 64 gigs in it. You've only used 20 of it, but they just bought a 128 gig phone, and you got to have it. And this is the sort of thing that we need to be out and educating people about, is saying, well, how far do you go in a day? Well, you know, maybe you map it out and you say, okay, well, you've done all of this journey. You did 67 miles. You used this much gasoline, which cost you this much money, which produced this much CO2. And it would work perfectly well for you to have, a small electric car. Plug it in at home. 110 plug socket is just fine for most people. The batteries don't have a memory to them, so you don't have to drain them down to nothing before you top them off again. People worry about, oh, the battery. How long is it going to last? Well, it has an 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty on it, so it's not a big concern. And the price of batteries is going right down. Like, for instance, when the Toyota Prius came out, that battery when it came out was $10,000. Right now, brand new and installed is under $2,000. So the price has just plummeted. Same is going to happen for our batteries and for Tesla's batteries. The more you build, the technology is getting better. There's solid-state batteries. There's graphene used for batteries. There's lithium air, zinc air, aluminum air. Sorry. So there's a lot of different technologies out there as well, and it's just growing all of the time. There are people that will say, well, I'm just going to wait a little bit longer and wait a little bit longer. Well, when do you bite the bullet? When do you say that's enough range for me or that's enough vehicle for me? So my goal is to be out and talking to people about it. There are two different groups of people. There's the luxury cars like the Tesla and a very unfortunate name that they call all of the other competitors for Tesla. They like to call them Tesla killers, which I actually find quite offensive. Firstly, the word in itself, and if it wasn't for Tesla, and if it wasn't for Nissan, we wouldn't be sitting here now. We'd still be driving around in gasoline cars, and not one manufacturer would have made the effort to do anything about this. But now we are on this really unstoppable train. We have Governor Polis, which is 4 days after he gets inaugurated, he's out signing an executive order to get something done. Now that's hitting the ground running. And that's marvelous. And then we have Will Torr in charge of the Colorado Energy Office. You cannot ask for anyone better than Will Torr to be running all of that. I am absolutely thrilled by that. But there are two groups of EV owners. There are the luxury models, the Jaguar, the Tesla, the cars like that. And then there are the cars like the Chevy Bolt, which is a sweet little car. I like them all. I'm actually agnostic rather than ecumenical maybe. But I love them all. And they all serve a different purpose. And it's no point in trashing someone else's car because it's not as good as yours or it's better than yours. It's what works for you. There are some great rebates available on them right now. And actually on Tuesday I was testifying at the House for HB 1159, which is for extending out the taxes, the tax credits for electric vehicles. And it looks like that it passed 7-4, so now it will go on to the Senate and we'll see what happens there. But I just love to be out and talking to people about this. So I don't know if you have any questions that you'd like to ask now while we're all here. Hello. Hello. Oh, okay, we're going to use microphones.
I leave from you, and I love it.
Hello.
The 85 miles range is perfectly fine
right.
for 99% of my driving. My question, I just signed a contract with Sunrun to put solar panels on my house. I have no money to put out. I pay something like 85% of what I'm currently paying to Excel to get solar panels on my house. Yeah. They do the whole thing. And they said the Leaf has the capacity to provide electricity to my house if there's an outage. Can you talk more about that?
So vehicle to home, there's two, there's vehicle to home, vehicle to grid. It's, with us, it's in early stages, and trying to get information out of someone from corporate is like pulling teeth. But yes, in the not too distant future, that's going to be a key part of it. They're starting to do that in Japan. They're starting to do it in England. I don't know why they're not here doing it, because we really need to do it here. But yes, at some point, that's going to be a fantastic thing. And that's also the other thing with that is people say, oh, well, yeah, that battery, when that battery's dead, which when I worked at Tesla, people said the same thing. I always point at you when I talk about Tesla. Sorry, Jim. He's my Mr. Tesla. But people would say, oh, yeah, you know, what are you going to do with that in 5 years' time or 6 years' time? It still has an awful lot of storage capacity in it. So you take them out of cars, you put them into a building, and that's your storage right there. I need that at my store. We've never charged for electricity in 8 years of having quick chargers. But the problem with a quick charger is my store will use, say, 50 kilowatts of power during the day. But someone comes and plugs in to the quick charger, the 50 kilowatt quick charger, I'm up at 100 kilowatts, and then XL are going, ooh, lovely, $20 a kilowatt. So I need to be able to trim it so that when someone plugs into my store, that my battery will offset that and just keep me fairly level. But we're not there yet either. And, so it ends up being expensive. But it's worth doing to not charge people. We never run out of our building when someone plugs in and go, oh, you didn't buy your Leaf here, or, oh, that's a Tesla, or that's a Bolt, you can't park here. We welcome everyone because these are the people who are spreading the word about EVs out to other people.
Hi there. I just wanted to mention there was a news flash came out from Elon today. This morning he said it would be a flash at 2 o'clock p.m. There was at 2 o'clock p.m. The Model 3 $35,000 car is now orderable. Mm-hmm. And so that I just thought I'd pass that on.
Yeah,
that means it's $27,000 if you get that base model after you get the Colorado and the national rebates.
Right. I mean, and that's marvelous. And it's a beautiful car. It really is a beautiful car. My personal feeling is that if I was him, I would have done it the other way around. I wouldn't have sold all of my most expensive cars and used up my 7,500 federal tax credits on the people that were buying the $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 cars. I'd have said, oh, you know what, let's launch the $35,000 cars first so everyone gets the advantage of that. But he obviously had a reason for that. Yeah. So
one of the things I wanted to make people aware of also was something I learned today in the EV
is that on?
Meeting. Is it even on? It's still the same 19. Okay, it's on.
Yeah.
So what I want to tell you is I just learned today in the what's it called? The EV roundtable. You were there?
Yes, this morning. Colorado Energy Office.
At the Colorado Energy Office, that Excel is planning to again offer very substantial rebates. And people always think they can't afford an electric car, but there's no state better than Colorado in the nation for rebates. They're absolutely massive. 3 of my neighbors bought a Nissan Leaf between $9,800 and $12,000, brand new 2017, when Excel for 1 month added a $10,000 rebate. Yeah. The thing is, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm having this event, is you people need to do your homework. You need to figure out which car is right for you. Does an EV work for you as a second car, as a first car? Doesn't matter, because if these rebates come online, you have 1 month to decide, and they're gone.
Right. So just a couple of points there. Although we used XL as a vehicle, that $10,000 was coming from Nissan. So sort of XL went, oh, look at us, we're great. But and they're great because they have been a vehicle for us, but the money all came from Nissan. So yes, when Nissan was trying to move the last of the 17s to make it very, very appealing, they took $10,000 off if you're an XL customer. You have the $5,000 state tax credit, $7,500 federal tax credit, and whatever discount there was from the store as well. So up to $22,500 on the last of the 17s, which is just insane. But yeah, good deal. But even now, there's still $3,500. This is a good time to be looking without sounding like a car salesman, and I am a car salesman. But and obviously, you have to take everything I say with a pinch of salt because I am a car salesman. But fiscal year end for most manufacturers is end of March. So everyone's going to be scrabbling to try and get out as many cars as they can. So yes, if you were going to say, what's a good time of year to be looking at cars, now is just before Christmas is, but this is a great time to be looking. And also because the deals may change on Monday or Tuesday, certainly from Nissan. Maybe they'll get a bit better on the 19s with the 40 kilowatt.
So I just wanted to ask, so I have an EV, I have a i3, and
Nice.
love it.
Yep.
Great.
That's
Electric
quick.
vehicles are super fun. But when I was looking for it, and looking at the options that Colorado has, the options are rather limited compared to some of the states that mandate having more EVs on the floor. Like I was looking at, it'd be great, this new Hyundai Ioniq 125-mile range, and all these other kind of options that aren't out here yet.
Yes.
And it seems like it's really hard to find information on if and when anything else is going to be coming to Colorado. I don't know if you know anything, have any insider information from, and I know that's not the company you work for, but yeah.
We don't have a lot of other vehicles planned, right, as far as I know. The only other thing we had was the ENV200, which is like the little van, which really we should have right now. And obviously ZEV is a big part of the reason why a lot of them aren't bringing them over here yet. So that's what everyone's working on here. Get us to be ZEV, and then people will bring in more vehicles to us. The vehicles we have right now suit an awful lot of people. Yours is a 4-seater really, because you have the cup holders in the middle. But 4 and 5 seaters are more than adequate for most people, as is the range on all of our cars, is just fine. There's very few people that have ever, that really run out of power. It is a little bit of a mindset change. I like to do more opportunistic charging in the winter when I'm driving around. So if I'm coming back from South Denver, I'll stop at Costco at their fast charger, have a piece of pizza and charge up, and then move on from there. But most of it, really, I'm only doing at home. And we're talking about, charging stations. Is there enough infrastructure? There are so many level 2 chargers out there. Some are free, some you have to pay for. None of them are particularly expensive, but we are spoiled. Once you've had an electric car, you get spoiled. And it's like, I am not paying for electricity. But someone has to, so we have to change that mindset a little bit.
Hey, so 2-part question.
Yep.
I live in an apartment complex,
Yes.
so I can't charge at home.
Right.
Is it still a possibility of getting an electric vehicle? Is there enough? I don't know what the alternative charging point is. And the other part of the question, I'll let you answer it, is if I'm someone who's in the market for a used Leaf, has there been any work done to see how much of those rebates that are on the new cars sort of trickle down to the used car market? Sort of what impact those have in that sector?
That's 2 great questions. The first one with apartments is that HOAs are can be a bit of a pain with that, but the state wants to push that hard now. So people like the what are they called? What's the name of the group? Regional Air Quality Council. There is a ton of funding available for level 2 and level 3 charging, and everyone is encouraging for apartments. From that perspective, the way to look at it as well is, how far do you travel in a day, and would you be able to plug it at work? Or, like, lots of people will come to my store, charge up during the day, and do live in apartments. But it is a bit of a pain to be doing that, for sure. As far as the rebates are concerned, it created quite a strange market, because you had a car that was, say, $34,000. People would trade it in 2 years' time, and they'd say, well, what's it worth? And you go, well, it's about $15,000. And they go, my God, it's just plummeted in price. Well, it has, but it hasn't, because if you got up to $22,500 off of that car in the first place, you didn't pay $34,000 for it. So our state, because of the size of our rebates, is we sell Leafs all over the country, because it's cheaper for them to buy it here, transport it out to where they live, because our cars are so inexpensive as a pre-owned car. From a low-income family perspective, it's a fantastic idea, and this is something that's being worked on as well. If you have a low-income family and they have $12,000 to spend, well, you can either buy something that's got 180,000 miles on it, leaks like a sieve, or you can get an electric car that's 2 or 3 years old, that you don't have to worry about putting gasoline in it. It doesn't have any fan belts, filters, hoses, oil, so their cost of running it is low, and generally they are just going to work and back. So that's a big market that we want to be pushing to. Because also the other thing is that people say, oh, well, what if I want to do a road trip? And funnily enough, I had a lady and gentleman in the store this week, and we're talking about the range. It's 150 miles. And she said to me, well, what if I want to do a road trip? And I said, well, how often do you do them? She said, never. And I went, okay, but if you did, you could rent something that does 12 miles to the gallon for 2 weeks, give it back at the end and go, thank goodness that's not my car. But, for, and it's like the same with people and say, well, you could drive a Tesla across the country. Well, you could. When do you do it? How often do you do it? Do you have the time to do it? I mean, it's a marvelous thing to do, to drive across the country, but not that many people actually do it. So we're planning for things that are not really likely to happen to us.
So we're going to do 2 more questions, and then we're moving on to our other presenter, and we'll have another round of questions. formal Q&A at the very end.
Yeah, sorry. Once you get me talking, I can't stop.
Hi there.
Hi.
Any thoughts about what's going to happen with the auto industry? I mean, just based on the Tesla news today, I know they're closing a bunch of their dealerships. Are just going to be selling online. Neo, Rivian, all these other companies are doing the same kind of thing. There's no maintenance.
Yeah. It is sort of the end of an era, I think, personally, because there's no revenue stream from it. CADA, the Colorado Auto Dealers Association, obviously don't like people like Tesla, sadly, because they don't have the model that we all have, is that we're franchises, and that's their business model. But it's whether you like it or not. The EVs are coming, and the change of dealerships is coming, and the education of the staff in dealerships is sadly quite appalling. The attitude of salespeople to electric cars. The guys that have been doing it for 40 years, scared of the technology, don't want to sell it. The young kids only want to sell GTRs and 370Zs and nothing else. And they're not being trained well by the management within the dealerships. So we are, in a way, our own worst enemy, and we're just sort of destroying ourselves from that perspective as well. But I think that at some point it's just going to be like boutique dealerships that will be around, because most people are going to, at some point in the not too distant future, my job's going to be gone because, well, you'll order your car online, it will drive itself to your house, you'll sit in it, it'll tell you what it's capable of doing, but you won't actually drive it. And then the other part of that is that once Uber and Lyft Maven start seriously getting into EVs, like millennials are not interested in cars whatsoever, not at all. Not at all. It's like, oh, I'll just pick up my phone, I'll call an Uber, he takes me where I want to get to, I don't even have to touch money at the other end of it, and so they're not really interested in it. So it's going to be electric Uber drivers, and then eventually with AI, it's going to be Uber cars, electric Uber cars with no driver in it. I don't know what we'll all be doing in a few years' time. It took 15 years to get from horse-drawn carriages to gasoline cars in America. So.
Anyway, okay. I wanted to mention that with charge point charging stations, it's a perfect solution for an HOA because you can limit the use of the charging station just to members of that HOA.
Right.
And you can charge them, $1 an hour or whatever it is, and they pay for their own electricity even though they don't have a charging station in their own garage. And so there's really no reason for a condo building or some other building not to have electric charging stations for its tenants or for its homeowners.
Right, and you know that side of it. But again, that's another attitude that we have to change, though, isn't it? It's the changing the attitude of the HOAs and the apartment owners to understand that you will lose business or you'll lose some clients because they're not going to go into your apartment complex if they've got a charger and if you don't. So you're going to have to get on board.
One last remark that I thought Nigel would actually make. Car salespeople help selling cars, but what Nigel always says is that every EV owner becomes an EV ambassador, and it's absolutely true. I've seen it in my neighborhood where people like Steve Stevens invite people to take a ride in their electric vehicle, be it a Volt or a Bolt or a Tesla, and butts in the seats is really what makes people much more likely to consider and eventually buy an electric vehicle, and the end result is our air quality will be much better in the Front Range, and it's terrible. So with that, Sarah Booth, she used to work for NREL and is now with a tiny outfit called, how is that pronounced? Sawatch Labs, and she'll tell you all about it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Everyone, I'm really happy to be here. It's really hard to follow Nigel. I was talking to a colleague this morning who said, "Oof, I saw you have to go after Nigel. That's brutal." He is really fun to see, and he always talks so enthusiastically about EVs. And as Martin mentioned, my background is actually in renewables. And I worked in renewables for more than a decade. I just made the jump into analyzing vehicles related to their suitability for EVs. So why am I here? Because what I can talk about is the power that data gives to us to be able to help people, especially in these early days when there aren't a lot of EVs out there, to figure out that actually, indeed, yes, an EV would be a good car for you. You can use it. You're not going to be stranded somewhere. So that's what the company that I work at, Sawatch Labs, it's a startup here in Denver. That's what we've been doing for about 2.5 years. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Oh, great. And I'm going to start, though, really high level, just looking at EV market trends and talk a little bit about the barriers and then how having data can help you see how you can address those barriers and then realize that, yes, you know, maybe an EV would be a good fit for me. So this is great to see. This is the percentage of EVs around the world. But it is tiny. It is increasing. It will continue to increase, but we're still at less than 0.5%. So how do we get that bigger? If you look at projections, this is from the IEA, I believe, but you look at projections kind of from any source, and they say, you know, yeah, we're going to keep seeing EVs grow. But how do we get that to be even more? How do we get people who are reluctant now in an EV that Nigel's selling? One of the things that I like to look at, and this kind of from my policy background, is look at what are other places doing that's working. And I recognize that this is really small, but what matters here, this is showing basically the top 10 markets for EVs around the world. And you see from 2013 to 2017, so over 5 years, in every country except for the Netherlands, which is over here, every country is seeing year-over-year increases in sales. And then the big thing that I want to point out is this. This is Norway. And Norway saw a 40% increase in cars, in electric vehicles being sold. A 40% of the vehicles being sold in 2017 and 2018 were electric vehicles. 40%. Nigel has some better numbers probably. Yeah.
Most people are freaking out about, oh, what about in the cold weather? It doesn't get much colder than Norway, and they're all driving them. And there's actually 226 Leafs in Alaska.
Nice, yeah,
so
it
cold
works.
Weather doesn't
they work,
matter.
Yeah. So what is Norway doing, and what can we learn from what Norway's done so far? One of the first things they did is they put out a goal to have, by 2025, all new cars that are sold, that they would be electric vehicles. That is the most aggressive goal that any country has around the world. And that's not that far off, right? We're talking 5-6 years. But in addition to that, they started in the 90s by developing a number of financial incentives and other policies that supported people who were adopting EVs. And so they got people ready to do it. They have tax incentives. They have incentives for if you're going to take your EV on a ferry from one place to the other, you don't have to pay as much as if you have an internal combustion engine or an ICE, et cetera, et cetera. On the flip side, they also tax ICEs very heavily. So it's more expensive to own an ICE. So it encourages people to start looking at those EVs. And then they also put a lot of money investing in public charging infrastructure. So that deals with the range anxiety issue. Now you know that you can access chargers kind of wherever you are. So, an interesting thing too about Norway is that about 98% of their electricity is generated with renewables. That's mostly hydro. But so these cars are clean cars, right? I went through all of that already. Slide ahead. So why do people want to adopt EVs? And then from that point, why aren't they, right? So most people initially that are looking to buy an EV, they want a car that's cleaner. They want a car that has fewer emissions, and that's what they're going after. But then also people are realizing that, like Nigel mentioned, you have a lot of savings on the operational side. Your fuel costs are a lot lower, and your maintenance costs are a lot lower. So why aren't they doing it then? This is the same thing. You can look at study after study after study, and it's kind of, you see range anxiety, that's a big one. You see charging accessibility, which ties directly into range anxiety. You see access to EV models, which someone mentioned here, right? Well, I can't access the model I want, or I only have access to 2 models. That's not enough for me. And then a big one is cost, right? It costs more. unless you bought a car last year, which I wish I did. But Volvo just came out with I think just this month, came out with a poll that they did that said 74% of the drivers that they surveyed see EVs as the future, and that's where we're going. 74%. And I think about that, and I think back to, but we still only have less than 0.5% of the drivers have EVs. So that's a big difference and a big change that's coming in the next few years. So I'm going to walk through these barriers and talk a little bit about how we see data as an opportunity to address those barriers. So range anxiety first. And again, I apologize, these are pretty difficult to see, but what actually matters more is just kind of the big picture. These top two things, this is also from the Volvo poll. There's a perception versus reality issue with range anxiety. They found that drivers who did not have EVs were more concerned about range anxiety than drivers who did have EVs. So the whole point about once you get someone an EV, they get it, it works, that's what's going on, is people who don't have an EV think, this technology won't work for me. It's a new technology, I'm not comfortable with it, I don't know, I'm worried. Once someone gets an EV, they're like, oh, turns out I only need to charge once every 3 days. I'm fine. And I know that's all I would have to charge if I had an EV. I've run the numbers regularly on my vehicle. But so having the data to be able to look at this and say, it's not an issue, that's what we do. So I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do, because it will kind of pepper through the rest of the presentation, is that we use telematics data. Is anybody familiar with telematics? Yeah, most people who work in fleet industries aren't. But telematics, there's a little device, it's about this big typically, and it plugs into a little port, the onboard diagnostic port that's underneath your dashboard typically, and it collects all kinds of data. Big fleets like UPS, et cetera, they've been using telematics data for years to help with their logistics and to optimize it. And now you see smaller fleets are using telematics data to figure out how to optimize their fleets. And one of the things that you can do with that data is you can see very, very quickly whether or not a vehicle is a good candidate for an electric vehicle, because you're getting what we care about most. You get tens of thousands of data points from these telematics devices. We care mostly about GPS and we care about timestamps, so we can understand where a vehicle's traveling, how far they're traveling in a day, how fast they're driving. Is it highway miles or is it stop and go traffic, right? Because that impacts the energy use for the vehicle. So it's basically along those lines. But we use that data and we run our analytics. We like to have at least 90 days of data, so we have a representative sample set of how that vehicle drives. And then we can figure out whether or not a vehicle is a good candidate, and very importantly, if it's not a good candidate. We don't want our clients to be putting EVs in bad places where their drivers can't get their work done. The worst thing is a driver who's trying to go from meeting to meeting and get stuck somewhere, right? Because now they say, EVs are terrible. We don't want an EV. And so the next time that organization tries to get more EVs in their fleet, they get a lot of pushback from their drivers. So in addition to figuring out at the front end, are you a good candidate, we can also use that data to then figure out, once those vehicles are in the fleet, are you getting the right miles on those EVs? And mostly we mean, are you getting a lot of miles on those EVs, right? You want all short trips on those EVs so that you can maximize your return on investment for the EVs and maximize your sustainability metrics and meet whatever goals that your organization has. And so to that point, this is kind of what we do for most of our customers right now, and that's we do EV suitability assessments. And this is taking all that data, which is astounding. This is what got me excited about this company, is that the amount of data completely blows your mind. You can make really, really informed decisions now before you purchase a vehicle about whether or not a vehicle will be a good fit. And so we score vehicles, and this is just a sample vehicle. The big one in the middle is the overall. That's the overall, whether or not that vehicle, based on 170 different areas that we measure, whether or not they are good EV candidates. And we break it down then into kind of 4 other things that you can see that roll up into that overall one. The first one is enough data. If we don't have enough data, we haven't seen that vehicle drive enough, we don't feel confident making a recommendation, right? We want to make sure we're capturing their shorter trips and their longer trips, and we have a good idea what it looks like. The energy use, the one that's a 95 up there, I'm going to hone in on this one a little bit because this one is kind of the one that's really interesting. The energy use is whether or not that vehicle could complete all of its driving in a single day without needing to charge. So if that's 100, it means that every day that we looked at that vehicle, it would never have needed to charge during the day. So that's an ideal candidate, right? Just charge at home, simple, easy to go. So that one's a 95. That means 1 or 2 days out of every 3 months, that vehicle would need to charge to complete all of its driving. And so that's still a really good candidate, especially if you're looking at fleets. We work a lot with organizations that have pools of vehicles. So if that person who usually drives that car, maybe they have 2 long trips in a 3-month period, maybe they take a different vehicle out of the fleet, right? And so that's a great way to see, well, how do I do this? It's back up again. You just had to threaten it a little bit. And then parking is another one that's really, really valuable. And what we're measuring here is how often is that vehicle parking at the same place overnight. And the reason we don't just do overnight, but long dwell periods, which is for 99% of vehicles is overnight. Because we want to make sure there's an opportunity to charge, and usually at level 1 or level 2 charging. We're not talking fast charge here. So if a vehicle parks at the same place every night, that's great. You put 1 charger in, you're good to go. If we see vehicles that park at multiple places, then maybe that vehicle, even though it's a really good candidate from an energy standpoint and from an economic standpoint, if it parks at 12 different places overnight regularly, that's not a good candidate anymore because you're not going to put in 12 different chargers. So it's good to know kind of what that all looks like so you can figure out if these candidates are good candidates. And economics, is it going to make the money back, right? If with the upfront cost, over the we use the 8-year lifespan typically for vehicles, over that 8-year lifespan, the operational savings based on how it's driven, will you offset the upfront cost of that vehicle or not? And the reason we do this is because EVs have been put into not so great applications. This is an example that you'll hear a lot. The Los Angeles Police Department purchased 100 i3s in 2016 to put in their non-emergency fleet. So it wasn't going to be a car that was coming after you if you're speeding, because it's not very intimidating, but it was going to be one that was doing all kinds of other things that the police department needed to do. About 1.5 years-ish after those were purchased, a news reporter found the odometer readings for all those. The vehicles were not being used. And some of them, more than half of them, had left less than 3,000 miles after 1.5 years, and many of them had fewer than 1,000 miles. So as a taxpayer, understandably, people were upset. We spent a lot of money to buy electric vehicles that are sitting in the lot, right? And so what they ended up doing is putting EVs in situations that people didn't feel confident that they could use them and not get stranded somewhere. And so that's bad. It's bad the next time they want to try and purchase EVs. No one's going to want to support them, right? It's bad for the EV market. It looks bad. It's just bad all around. So we try to avoid that. And that's where we find that the data can be so valuable to help people make the right decision. And importantly, go to their drivers and show them that this vehicle will work for you. So on the flip side, on the really positive side, the state of Colorado has been doing this analysis, and we've been supporting them since about May or June of last year. And we've been really lucky to work with the state, it was the Colorado Energy Office and State Fleet Management, because they have been doing a very good job of trying to figure out how to get EVs in the right spot. So they are trying to get 200 EVs in the fleet, the state fleet, by 2020. And so our analysis this summer and fall impacted their procurement decisions in December and January of this year. And we analyzed 57 vehicles across 7 different agencies all across the state. And after looking at those for more than 90 days, we recommended 34 of them were really good candidates for battery electric vehicles, either a Leaf or a Bolt, and then 14 for PHEVs, plug-in hybrids. If all of those were implemented, the state agencies combined over that 8-year lifespan would save $100,000. So that's a lot, especially when you're talking about not very many vehicles, really. And that's, not even counting if gas prices go up, et cetera, right? So we try to be pretty conservative. What was really, really enjoyable working with these organizations and these 7 agencies is that with each of these agencies, we had meetings throughout, and then we had meetings at the end. And we sat down with the agencies, we were able to show them what the results were, and they talked to us about what the contexts were that these specific vehicles were used in. And so some of the vehicles that are really good candidates, financially, from an energy standpoint, they park at the same place every night. Turns out they have unique demands on them. Sometimes they need to be available for an emergency. They're designated as vehicles that need to be available for an emergency. At any moment, they need to be able to go as far as they need to go. So it doesn't matter if it's a good EV candidate in any other case. I knew I was going to knock that over, Nigel. So anyways, it was really good to be able to talk with them and see what works, right? With the data, we can tell them so much about the way the vehicle's driven, but we can't know what that context is. So it's really important to have those conversations with them. But a big takeaway from here is, based on that analysis, the state is purchasing 9 battery electric vehicles and 17 PHEVs this year. And we've started the analysis for the second round, which will inform the 2020 procurement cycle. So what is so cool is to see the state of Colorado is putting so much effort into making sure their drivers can do exactly what they need to do with an electric vehicle, and that their drivers know that they can do what they can do, right? They know that that vehicle is going to get them where they need to get and back. So the next barrier was access to charging, which again ties back into the range anxiety. One of the things here is, this just shows it's increased a lot. There's a lot more charging. And the top part that's green, that's publicly available. So it's a pretty small percentage, and the rest of it is all private. You'll see a big increase in fast chargers, but still most of it is private slow chargers. And but what I wanted to call out here, this is also from the Volvo poll that they just released. 51% of charging today happens at home. As the range increases on batteries, that number increases. That gets higher and higher. And then the whole idea about not having access to chargers decreases. That's a barrier that we will see be reduced in 2 ways, because people are not going to need it as much, and because there's going to be so many more chargers that are going in. We've seen a lot of efforts with that. And then what we do on the data side to help address that barrier is kind of what I talked about already. We figure out where those vehicles park overnight. You can see the green here. The way this table is laid out, it's for 6 different vehicles, and that's their primary parking address. These are made-up addresses. This is nobody's actual vehicle. But what we do is we look at that top one. You can see 100% in the primary parking. That vehicle, every single night, parks at the exact same place. That vehicle is a good candidate from an economic and a financial standpoint and a parking standpoint. Now you know confidently that vehicle can charge every night and be good to go. This vehicle on the bottom parks 62% at the primary location and parks 5% at the secondary location, 5% at the third location. We don't go beyond that. So this vehicle parks at lots of different locations. Even if that vehicle gets 100 in terms of suitability from an energy and an economic standpoint, don't make that one an electric vehicle. You cannot install chargers at 12 different places to support that vehicle. So that's how we use data to address the charging accessibility barrier, to help people be comfortable with knowing that they can have access to all the chargers that they would need for their vehicles. Access to EV models. Nigel already talked on this, and so did Phil. This is, so I'm going to skip through this one pretty quickly, but it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg thing. Dealers don't have markets here, don't have as many models here, and so when people go in, they don't see as many. So you have a little bit of a supply and demand issue, but hopefully with ZEV in August, fingers crossed, 2023, we'll get more models here. So I'll skip through because this is all about ZEV. And then other policy drivers that you see that try to address this issue is things, and this is very few countries do this, but this is what Norway has done, like I mentioned, that they're essentially banning the sale of ICEs. If they're saying all new vehicles by 2025 must be EVs, that's what they're doing. And so there's a handful of countries that are doing that, but most of them are doing this out in like the 2040 timeframe, which is a long time from now, right? And that's the IEA, if you're interested. So then the final one, the final big barrier, cost, right? Costs are decreasing. Nigel hit on all of this. I guess that's a benefit of going after you. You cover a lot. What's changing, though, is the battery cost, just like Nigel said. And we're looking at, 2025-ish, give or take, battery costs are going to be low enough that the cost of an EV is going to be on par with the cost of an ICE. That means that barrier is gone. For right now, it's still an issue, and it's still an issue with a lot of people that we talk to. And so what we do is we do that economic analysis that you see down here with the green numbers. We look at the net savings. So that's over the lifetime of that vehicle, including the upfront cost of the vehicle, including the operational savings. What does that look like? So for this specific vehicle, they would save $3,000 over that 8 years. And then we also break it out and we highlight the operational savings because we find that clients have access to different pricing. So if we use MSRP, but some clients might be able to get some different discounts, or they have group buy options, et cetera, et cetera. So we also break out the operational savings. So that's, if you divide that by 8, the 15,000, so it's about just under $2,000, that vehicle, that's what they would be saving operationally every year based on how much they drive and based on their maintenance savings. That's a lot a year for a single vehicle. Cleaner. This one I always like talking to friends about, people about. I just had a friend call me today, actually, and say, hey, I have a friend who maybe wants to purchase an EV, but they live in Salt Lake, and they say because they don't have solar on their roof, will that car actually be any cleaner? Or is it just the same as operating with gas? It's cleaner. It is. It's on average about 40% fewer CO2 emissions if you look at these top 6 countries right here. It's cleaner in the US and in the UK or any other country that has more renewables on the mix. But 40% averaged across, that's a big difference, and that only gets better as the electricity mix in the grid continues to get greener. That gets better, and EVs get even greener, but today they are. And then the other thing that I just wanted to talk about, because this is the value of that data, the telematics data. My husband always jokes. He's like, oh, you talk about telematics data all the time. It's just so nice to be able to have so much data to be able to make a data-driven decision. And instead of having to do assumption after assumption after assumption, you can really look at what the impact's going to be. So what we can do with that data is move beyond even looking at EVs. Is we can look at how do you get the people that you're moving around for your company, how do you get them on the right technology? Is that an EV? Is it an ICE? Maybe they have to take a long trip and they're staying overnight and there's no charging. Is it maybe a car share option, or is it a bus? What does that look like? With all these options that are changing, is it an Uber? How do you compare all of that and then optimize for the cost to your company, the time for your employees, because you don't want them standing around waiting, right? That's a cost to that. And your sustainability goals. And so looking at this now, when you're looking at all these different systems and opportunities and options for mobility, you can use this data and figure out how do we optimize this for whatever our goals are. So it's pretty cool. And then this is another one that this was working with a client who has a handful of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Plug-in hybrid electrics are notorious in fleet situations for not getting plugged in. Because it's not your own car, you know you can put gas in it, it's no big deal, right? So our clients had an inkling that their vehicles were not being plugged in. So they asked us to look at the data. So we looked at the state of charge for the vehicles. And yep, lo and behold, it was below a 10% rate of being plugged in. And this isn't every time they were parked. This is at when we knew that there was a charger nearby. So we're definitely been missing some and being conservative on that. It's just when we knew they were near a charger. The client, we told the client, yep, you were right, it's below 10%. And the client said, oh, okay, sent an email out, told the employees, you need to plug them in, these are the benefits to our organization, et cetera, et cetera. That week, plug-in rates jumped, and they have remained higher. Now, 15%, still very low, right? You're not optimizing your investment in a plug-in hybrid if you're not plugging it in. If all your miles are gas, you just have a more expensive ICE. But this is really cool, and this is powerful, and this is what the data helps you do. And that's why I am excited about telematics data. And I think that's about it.
First question.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful to sell those telematic boxes at the grocery store.
Yes.
So that all my relatives could say, is there any thoughts about that?
That's interesting. So we're a reseller we are data agnostic. We use telematics data from any provider. But we are a reseller for one, which is called Geotab. And as far as I know, nobody sells them on a one-off basis like that. But we know that there's going to be more and more interest in that. So I don't know. I don't know of that. I can ask my colleagues and see if they've heard, but I have one of my car. It's great.
Why aren't we seeing some serious inventions and inventiveness from talented people to make these obsolete powered cars electric?
Yeah, you know, Nigel, I don't know if you have any information on that. I know that in general, you see that looking at aftermarket add-ons, even to brand new cars or relatively new cars, there's a company called XL Fleet that does that for trucks, and it's not affordable yet. I think it will be, and I don't know of anything that's happening kind of the sedan level. I don't know if you do, Nigel.
Even if I'm selling an electric car, so it's an electric car on the road, it's yet another car on the road. And that's the problem, is that at some point, we need to start taking some of these cars off the road. People need to be sharing rides more or working from home more, because we're just adding. It's like I come from London, and I go back and see my mum and dad, and there are so many cars, and the streets were never, ever planned for this. So people's beautiful English front gardens have all been ripped up and put concrete on them, and that's where people park. And because there's no room, people park with 2 wheels on the pavement and 2 wheels on the road in either direction on both sides of the road. And at some point, that one car is going to roll off the line of a dealership, come out onto the road, and that is going to be the car that's going to cause the gridlock, and no one will move at all. So we just need to get EVs is a great way to go, but at some point, you've got to get cars off the road. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice.
China is leading the world in PV, wind, happens to planting more trees than the rest of the world combined. I think you showed a graph up there with China, but I don't know what the graph was, but it was steeper than all the others. Can you talk about China?
Yeah, China is leading in terms of the number of EVs sold, EVs in the market. That's what that showed. They are number one. They have surpassed all other markets.
Can you predict a little bit more?
Oh, I think that will continue. They're doing a lot with buses too. I don't work in that sector, so I don't know. I know a lot of kind of anecdotally about electric buses, and they're doing a ton to get that in the market. I was talking with someone who works at Green Lots, which is a charging company, and she said that their markets that they're really interested in is in China and Asia. And so it's interesting because a lot of what we do is in markets where you have the existing infrastructure and you're trying to change it. And for them, what's really interesting is working in markets that can just leapfrog all of these cars on the road, all of these ICEs. And so there's definitely a leapfrogging that's going on where when you're expanding, you have economic growth the way they do, they're able to just move straight to EVs. And you see a lot, India's doing a lot on EVs too. They have terrible air pollution, and that's a big impetus for doing that. But I imagine that will continue. I don't know much about the details beyond that.
Anything about incentives?
I don't know anything about the incentives in China. Phil does though. You can come up.
If you saw 60 Minutes this past Sunday, the first story was about NIO, one of the new Chinese electric vehicle startups, and not necessarily about NIO, but in China, you pretty much have to pay for a license, sort of like auto registration, and if it's an internal combustion engine, it's like 15 grand, $15,000. Translate that into yuan, and it's probably a couple years' pay. If you get an electric vehicle, so that's the kind of incentives they have on the demand side, and there are tons of supply incentives. All the different automakers, there are several Chinese automaker startups, EVs only, that are getting heavily backed by the government.
There's 100 EV makers in China.
100.
Wow.
When you're talking about fleet efficiency, I thought for sure you're going to talk about the fact of downtime, because if you have a fleet of, you'd probably need a fleet of 12 police cars to have 10 on the road at any given time, whereas a fleet of 10 electric cars would be on the road every day.
It's true. Yeah, 100% that utilization and downtime is incredibly important in terms of what you're making, the ROI for your fleet, right? Yes, we look at that I just didn't talk about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
No, you're right. Another thing is idling. We look at idling, which is a really big deal when you're looking at sustainability and EVs in particular, the amount of time that vehicles idle.
In Denver, in particular, mass transportation is something that people really would love to use, but find it very difficult to use because of that final mile, especially when it comes to the commute for work, and we end up cramming the highways and just making it a foggy day every day. But so in regards to government policy, tax implications on a company, if they were to create a fleet of vehicles for carpooling of EV vehicles to the employee themselves, because if you provide those types of benefits to employees, they can be taxed on that as income. Mm-hmm. So is there any kind of policy in place to promote companies to provide company cars that are EV where it won't have that tax implication on the employee?
No, go ahead.
Yeah. On the Uber side, which is just to follow on what Phil was saying, they did a pilot in London, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago, and they had a handful of drivers that had to drive EVs, that drove EVs. They gave them incentives to do it. And they had a lot of the same issues, the same barriers that we see here, and they actually found that they couldn't drive 10 hours a week. They drove 10 hours a week fewer than they had wanted to because they needed to spend time charging. And so they said, if we had bigger ranges, we could do this, it would work. We're working with a couple pilots that are getting kicked off in a handful of cities around the country to look at what it looks like if you have EVs in Uber, Lyft type applications, and to see, are they driving with passengers the whole time? Are they just adding more vehicles to the road because they have a lot of time going in between? So there are people who are looking at those types of things. It doesn't get to your first mile, last mile question, but I think there's a lot more interest kind of in EVs beyond the typical individual owner and fleet owner and kind of what it looks like in other mobility options.
I have a concern about road taxes because we're not going to be able to pay for our highways as more electric vehicles are driving unless we switch to having people pay based on VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Is anyone talking about this? Because I'd say 5 years from now it's going to be a major crisis.
People are definitely talking about it. It's Oregon or Washington has a bill that's being considered on it right now.
And Minnesota and Idaho.
Yeah. Yeah, no, people are talking about it, definitely, and trying to figure out how do you do that fairly, and how do you, is it VMT, or what does that look like?
But it wasn't even in the mix of conversation last year when they were having, 109 and 110 on the ballot, and there's not even any discussion of it in Colorado.
Yeah, I think because it's so low, the percentage of EVs, it will come. I mean, the same thing happens with solar, right? You look at rooftop solar, where people were really worried about what that impact is on the rest of the ratepayers if they're being incentivized to do it. And then those discussions come more and more and get a lot more traction when you get more deployment.
I'm Bob Wilson. I ran for the RTD board in this area and lost. But I was fairly up on the what's happening, and then talked to Jim Smith before. With the transportation, the first and final mile, there are some things happening. First of all, in the electric buses, remember the 16th Street Mall is all electric. They put in big chargers up at their shops, et cetera, et cetera. And secondly, RTD has gotten a fair-sized grant. I think it's $7 million for the VW settlement, and they're going to buy a bunch of electric transit buses to try run around the city and see how they do, how they perform. Also, RTD has an autonomous vehicle route out at the Panasonic, Route 61, where they have an autonomous van running around in a certain loop, taking people at the Panasonic area, Panasonic 61st and Pena, University of Colorado A-line, you got to get that in, transit stop. So they're making progress. One of my platform planks was first and final mile, maybe figure out how that can be enhanced, get people to the transit station. And the last point, as a retired electrical engineer, I served on the RTD's sustainability committee, and every new parking garage that RTD has built has the capability of a lot of electric vehicle charging stations. Arvada has a space for 12 and put in 3 or 4. RTD has a pilot project of publicly available charging stations at the Central Park station out of the A line. They have a few, let's see, 2 or 3 fleet vehicles at their Allotti maintenance facility where the people are getting used to them and finding out they're pretty peppy. They like them for running around. And other things are happening. So if you're concerned, remember you are represented by one of 15 RTD directors. You got a new one up there in Boulder. Get a hold of her and say, we want more electric vehicles, we want more sustainability, we want more first and final mile on electrics. So.
In your barriers analysis, it looked like you were using the barriers in terms of the existing electric vehicles that are available. It seems to me that a big problem, particularly here in Colorado, is that the variety of electric vehicles is so limited. If you want to do 4x4, forget it. If you want to have a truck, forget it. If you need a car that's got pretty high clearance because you have difficulty getting out, forget it. So what do you see coming down the pike in terms of a bigger variety of electric vehicles so we can actually break through into those other major markets?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think Zev is going to help a lot with that. There is the Kona, it's a small SUV that just got Car of the Year at the Detroit Auto Show. Not electric Car of the Year, Car of the Year. So they're coming. Manufacturers see that there's the demand for that, for SUVs, for trucks. Ford announced that they're going to have a hybrid F-150, I believe in 2020, but I think the dates are a little bit iffy. And then also that they're going to have a fully electric F-150 sometime following that. There's a truck called the Rivian. I think someone else might have mentioned that earlier. And it is a outdoor, out in the woods, 4-wheel drive truck. It's kind of like a Tesla. It's not affordable for most people, but there are a lot of manufacturers that are working to develop vehicles to serve that market. I think it's a little bit of a just kind of wait until they are available, but I don't think it's that far off.
This question is for Nigel, and you'd mentioned that the governor issued an executive order in January, and there were 3 parts of it. I'm curious how you saw the importance of those 3 parts, and whether you can translate any of those parts into sales at your dealership or one in, for example, Glenwood Springs.
Do you mean for the charging stations, the charging infrastructure?
Yes.
All I can do from my perspective is be ready for everything that's coming down the pipeline, and I am prepared. And it is interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, really it's Tesla and Nissan have built this fantastic foundation for electric vehicles. We have used up our, and GM really, we have used up our 200,000 federal, we haven't yet, but the others have used up their federal tax credits to build this fantastic foundation. And now what will happen is all the other manufacturers have finally realized that this is the way that they have to go, and they are going to come and build on our foundation. And that is actually why we're trying to get the federal government is trying to extend out the 7,500 federal tax credit, so it doesn't end at 200,000 cars. It's say 2003 or 2005 to give everyone an even playing field, because we've used up our monies to, you know, because there will be a limited amount of loyalty. If my car suddenly has no federal tax credits and every other car that's out there, VW, Volvo, has a 7,500, doesn't matter how lovely we are, they're just going to go, yeah, great, but I'm going to buy that because it's got a 7,500. So I think a fairness of the spread of tax credits. I don't know if that quite answered your question, but sorry.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up here because we can go into the informal Q&A over whether it's beer, wine, and food. But I wanted to ask one last question of the two presenters, because I had basically started to suggest it, namely that you all do your homework and find out whether an EV would work for your family. And I was hoping that one of you, Nigel or Sarah, could perhaps give us a little list of a checklist, what should be on that homework assignment, so that you can have an easier time to make that decision.
I like that.
Okay, yeah, it's a very short list, really. It's how far do you go in a day, and that's not difficult to find out. Just reset your odometer or your trip meter, find out what's the longest trip you do. Can you plug in at home, either to a 110, which is called a level 1 charger. It's a slow way of charging, but for most people, like for me, I've been driving it for 8 years now. When I just use 110. When I get home in the evening, I plug my car in, it's full by the morning. And even if it's not completely full, it doesn't matter, because I'm not emptying it out every day anyway. So just see how far you're going. Can you plug it in at home? If your house is over 40 years old, you do need to have your wiring checked for that. I have old aluminium wiring in my house, and I'd plug my car in when I first got it, and I'd come out to the garage, and the fuse had blown. No idea why. Just irritating, though. Found out that it was on the same line as my microwave, so every time someone turned a microwave on, I just shut off my car. So that sort of thing. How far have you got to run the wire? Do you want to use 110 or 240? 240 needs to be a 50 amp breaker on it, so you've got to have a breaker that can handle that. Our cars have 2 years of free charging on a network called EVgo. Well, that's not everyone, but that is a useful little thing. But there isn't really a long checklist. How far do you go in a day? Can you plug in at work? Can you plug in at home? Very few people are charging outside of their home environment. It is interesting, though, that we see more of the new Leafs with the bigger range running out of power more than the little ones, because people are just going, oh, it's got so much power in it, I won't plug it in. But the habit, like your phone, how often do you forget to plug in your phone? Once you got it now, yeah, you just never forget it. You only ever do that once.
And one question, since we have so many ski bums in the area, can you give us an example of how much energy you recoup rolling down those hills?
Yes, I can, actually. I drove a Leaf it was nice weather, so it was like 70 degrees, and I stuck the car at cruise control 70 miles an hour. I drove from Boulder to Avon. I started at Boulder at 98%. The first climb is the worst, the one that gets you up from the 93 up to about Black Hawk. And I made a list, and if you want it, I can send it out to you, that shows you where I was, how much power I had used, how many miles it had left in it. Anyway, I got to Avon with 15% left and 27 miles. I charged up there, I got to 98%. I left there. When I got back to Boulder, I had 34% left and 67 miles, because there was so much regeneration coming back down the hills. But once we have, it's only going to need 3 or 4 charging stops up the I-70 for you to be able to get straight across it. Somewhere around about Idaho Springs or Silverthorne, which is where the Tesla ones are. There's going to be one at Vail, there's going to be one at Glenwood Springs, and there's another one. But once you've got all of those, there's no fear.
And I would add to Nigel's list, another thing that's valuable to look at is go to the Alternative Fuels database, AFDC. It's run by the Department of Energy, and NREL puts a lot of effort into that. And you can look at where there are chargers all over. So if you have a trip that you'd like to take often, and it's outside of the normal charging hours, you can take a look and see where those charging stations are, just to see if that would be a good fit for you.
PlugShare is a good app for that. That shows you them all. ChargePoint has one. Easy Charge has one. So there's a lot of them.
Okay, well, with that, I thank you very much for coming. Thank our two